Well, I've had about four appearances on GB News with Jim Dale of late, and they've all been pretty much the same. I haven't bothered even reporting on most of them. But because he raised a few topical issues in his normal way this time on January the 12th, 2025, I thought I'd deal with this particular episode as swiftly as I can. I just wish I could get a better opponent to have a more serious, proper discussion. But unfortunately, I missed an opportunity recently where they couldn't get me on the phone, and someone else appeared, and it wasn't Jim Dale that I would have been against. I would have loved that. Anyway, I keep my phone near me now on a Sunday. So there we are, and this is a normal Jim Dale session. I'll let him start, and I'll interject as we go. It's just as silly as normal, really, but it raises something about the LA fires. So it's an excuse for me maybe to put my input in on that.
So research has revealed wind farms were paid £400 million last year to turn off their turbines during high winds. Now that alone added around £13 to household bills. Well, as we all know, Ed Miliband, Energy Secretary, is firmly set on aggressively pursuing a green agenda using our taxes. But has it got to the point where we need to rethink the net zero? I mean, really seriously, why is it taxpayers that have to pay so much of this? Isn't it up to us to decide whether we really want to go in this direction? Joining me now, climate scientist Paul Burgess and also senior meteorologist and social commentator Jim Dale. Jim Dale, I'm going to start with you. So, wind turbines, in your view, are they a good thing?
Yeah, they've always been a good thing. Let's just say, first of all, it's not Ed Miliband on his own, remember. 98% of the House of Commons supports net zero. It is in law. And therefore, he's pushing ahead with what the House of Commons voted for. In terms of wind vanes, in terms of the renewable energy per se, of course it's necessary. And why? Because this week has been a fiery week, to say the least. Extreme devastation in Los Angeles in terms of what's gone on. Climate induced without a shadow of a doubt. Nothing to do with arsonists or anybody else. The background, the foundation is all there.
Just to brief you partly on what he said and partly what's coming on the LA fires. This is the average recorded rainfall in total inches of rainfall per year for the Los Angeles area there. And in 2023-24, it was 18.2% above average. In 22-23, it was 18.59% above average. And in the previous year, it was just under 1% below average. So we haven't had, in the last few years, we have not had other than a lot of rainfall. Not a drought, the exact opposite. But let's facts not get in the way of Jim Dale. But I want to make a further point. All forest fires depend on the ground load. That's the amount of debris and rough stuff on the ground that accumulates over time. Without that ground load, you can't have the forest fire. The Aborigines in Australia used to burn ground loads off before they become high enough to be critical and start to burn the trees themselves. With a minimal ground load, the fire that you start passes quickly through the trees. There's not enough load there to set the trunks ablaze and cause the forest fire. So ground load was just left to accumulate in LA because of all the woke policies of their governor. On top of that, of course, there wasn't enough water. The water resource management was deplorable, so there wasn't any water in the fire hydrants. In fact, organisations are now being sued because of that.
As well as that, we've had 5 or 6 data reports from the various meteorological agencies that have all reported that we surpassed 1.5 degrees. It's now 1.6 degrees since the Industrial Revolution. It's a one-way street. The graphs show it. I've been on this program many, many times and other programs, and it's not just me who's saying this. It's 99% of scientists say it. etc. So there's every need to continue what we're doing. Otherwise, we're going to get another Valencia, we're going to get another Los Angeles, and whatever else is going on around the world. And do you know what? There's that many of them. I'm starting to lose count.
And every single time I'm on with Jim, he just lists the latest disasters around the world. I mean, I've actually been given over, well, maybe 80 scientific papers on the Valencia floods and Spain, and also the Rhine, and so on, central Germany and all that. And actually, all the evidence is they're decreasing. But it doesn't matter to Jim. He just blasts on with all this stuff. None of it is scientifically based. The very first time I met Jim in the green room, he walked in and started scouring through all the newspapers that are available there. And he was scouring for the latest stories to talk about. And that's what he bases his science on. What the journalists say. It's like a closed loop, this, and nothing to do with the truth or science. And I can only smile now when I'm on with him.
It's inevitable now, and sooner or later, it's here. And it's only 2.5 years ago, by the way, that we saw wildfires in southeast England, whilst we got the all-time record temperature of 42.3 degrees.
All right,
this is stacking up. Join the dots.
All right, well, I've joined them up, and they didn't really come to that. Look, 98%, you said 98% of the government support net zero. They may support net zero, but they may not support wind farms, which is the point we're discussing. So, sorry, let me just get to that. Also, you said the fires in LA, 99.9% were caused by climate and not arsonists. We don't know that yet. I mean, isn't that what you were saying? We don't know that for sure.
No. I'm basically saying that the foundation for the fires, for the fires that we've seen, was laid down by two things. Well, three things in actual fact. The first one being the rainfall that accumulated over a period 8-9 months ago, which was flooding type rainfall. Now that made the fauna, all of the forest, etc., around the shrubs, all grow to tremendous amounts. Then we went into a drought situation in Los Angeles. No rain for the last 6-7 months, and a blazing hot summer. So there's your foundation. It doesn't matter whether it's an arsonist, whether it's a lightning strike.
Well, it does. Well, I think it. No. It does matter whether it's an arsonist or not, because if the third thing in that isn't there, then there's no fire. Paul Burgess.
Well, California used to have droughts in the past of hundreds of years. Well, this is the work of Mr. Cook, Dr. Cook, and he reconstructed the last 200-year drought, the reference at the bottom there, for the western USA. And as you can see here, that first drought there was natural. That was about 200 years long. Another one, we had a little bit of wet in the middle, then another one, 200 years, and gradually it got wetter and the droughts got less. But all of those were natural, well before the Industrial Revolution. And this little tiny peak at the end, of dryness, this little tiny peak at the end, that is man-made. But all the rest, they weren't. But man is responsible for this. This is how absurd the whole of this is. It's just nonsense. What Jim is saying there is that somehow climate change caused too much rain and then too much drought. And in other words, there's weather. And he's meant to be a weatherman. He doesn't even understand it. As an aside, this is the temperatures for the whole of the USA over the last 20 years. Now, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. First of all, you can see the peaks are getting less and less. You can see it along the arrow here. And you can also see, of late, the lower temperatures are getting less, and therefore the extremes are getting less. So when you look at the entire USA, as an example, there is no increase in temperatures as forecast, no link with rising CO2 whatsoever, that's totally fake, and less extreme conditions as regards temperatures. If you look at the history of droughts and the hydrology, the situation in America there, far, far worse in the past. Now, I want to make something very clear, and it's common sense. Since 1850, when just before that the Thames was freezing over, since then we've gone up by 1.5 degrees, let's say. Right? If we've done that totally to the benefit of all mankind, that warming has been super good for all mankind. It hasn't been bad. So I don't know whether these people want us to go back to the Thames freezing over and to poverty and starvation, because that was the past. The worst droughts were way back then. So you have to look at the data. You have to look at the science, not the latest newspapers or the scare. Now, as regards wildfires, for example, NASA themselves say they've reduced. That's NASA looking down at the Earth from satellites. All the data's there, presented it many times. But the big thing today is this. the British public are being asked to believe not the evidence of their eyes, not the evidence of their ears or their pocket. They're being asked to believe that somehow this wind energy that Jim has claimed up to 9 times cheaper at times, I can explain that, but it's not. It's more expensive. And in fact, if you took the last 5 years, well, the 5 years up to about November 24, if you take that period and you actually pretend we had no wind power, just gas, we'd have saved £18 billion. I've got the graph there, right?
Yeah, but,
the graph is there, and so on. So there's a huge, gas is much cheaper than wind. Now, what people say is the gas price establishes the price of the energy. It doesn't. The contract for the difference price for wind farms, and by the way, the journalist who said 400 million this last year is wrong. It's just on £1 billion this last year we paid to switch off wind farms. Just under £1 billion. But that's going to rise tremendously because as we're increasing all this wind power, we're not going to need it at times, and we still have to pay for it under that.
But Paul, don't we need an alternative though, just in case we run out? Surely we should be making the most of the wind and the sun and all the things that we have. I would rely on it 100%, but surely we should do something.
We should we should. We should be fracking and nuclear. Basically, that's what we should be doing. Yes, we should be using gas reserves. We have enormous amounts of them, and we should be using them. But that Parliament is talking about, has passed legislation about fracking, where they don't understand in science what a logarithmic scale is. So they didn't understand. They've actually asked for the vibrations caused by fracking more sensitive by 3,500 times than America. I mean, they're technically illiterate, along with anyone who really hasn't studied this subject scientifically. There is no doubt. Look, we have just beaten Germany at something. We've beaten Germany at being the most expensive electricity in the world, and yet we're asked to believe the exact opposite.
Yeah, thank you. Look, Paul, have you not seen the price of natural gas on the open market in Europe? It's at record levels. That's one of the reasons why energy prices are up. The other one was Putin before that. So let's not blame renewables for the price of this.
I've done many videos. You only have to look at my recent big documentary, my 2.5-hour one, and go to the particular section, and you will see the lie, the deception about the cost of renewables, right? Renewables make it much more expensive. I mean, last week, we paid over £5,000 per megawatt hour. Now, gas, without the carbon tax they add, because they say it's expensive, but they more than double the price by putting a carbon tax on, so they invent the price. But gas is roughly, it varies, but roughly about £54 a megawatt hour. But last week we had to pay over £5,000 per megawatt hour to make sure we could actually meet the demand because of the intermittency of renewables. It is madness in the extreme. Absolutely in the extreme. And this man is completely out of his depth on this subject. He really, really is. Please give me someone decent to debate with.
The one thing I would say to you is well done for coming on, first of all. You're the only guy of the 2% of deniers in this country, man-made climate deniers within reform. No, but basically, I've been chasing reform MPs because they're basically scared. Since the election, since we've had the catastrophic events around the world, trying to get one of them to talk about climate change is impossible. And so I thank you for coming on and being brave and doing that, because you are on the mark.
Jim, he is a climate scientist and also a commentator.
Well, he's not.
He is. No, he is, Jim. Just like the same as you being a meteorologist, yeah? Otherwise, we don't want to go into that one.
There you are again. He's doing personal attacks rather than dealing with evidence. But, of course, Jim is not a qualified meteorologist by any standard. And the Royal Society of Meteorology, they are the only people who can qualify meteorologists in the UK to be properly, qualified meteorologist. And Jim is not that. He's a meteorological observer from many years ago in the Navy. And she knows this, Nana knows this, and so on. And so he can't stop the personal stuff. He can't stop talking about every other subject but the subject at hand. That's the tactic, always.
Final word to you quickly, Paul Burgess. You've got about 10 seconds.
Look, I was in charge of water resources planning for a whole country and all the monitoring of the data. When Jim quotes temperatures like he quoted there, 40.1, that's at Heathrow. Do you know something, Jim? You probably don't know this because you read the thermometer, you don't understand it. When you look at a Stevenson screen, unless there's 1 metre a second, according to the standard, right?
Let him finish. We'll let him get to the end.
22 miles an hour at 10 metres. unless that wind's passing through, it overreads. Yeah. All right, let me interrupt and explain this. Stevenson screen's a white box with all the slits around it where you measure temperatures. That's how you measure the temperatures on the ground. And the air passing through it to get a correct temperature must be at least 1 metre a second. Now, wind is measured at 10 metres normally, so you'd need 22 miles an hour of wind at that height to give you 1 metre a second through the Stevenson screen. That's an international ISO standard, That's part of what it says. Now, if you don't have that wind passing through, the temperature overreads. So in a high over Britain, when you've got no wind blowing, you overread. And all I'm explaining is this is fundamental. So there's a difference between reading the thermometer and understanding what you're reading. And Jim is trained to read the thermometer, not necessarily to understand what you're reading. That's the point I'm trying to make. But in this last section of the video, when I'm given the time, I'm given the last bit, which is unusual actually, but I'm given the last bit to sum up, as it were. He constantly over talks me. He constantly blots it out so as to negate, even though he's not supposed to. So he just totally ruins the last bit because he can't stand for me to get my point in. Just watch. So when we get a high like we've just had, right, and you get the sun in the summer, it's going to overread by a big margin, which is why the World Meteorological...
Just let him get to the end of it, Jim. Let him finish, please. Then we've got to move on.
Only 13.7% of the UK Met Office gauges are accurate to within 1 degree, let alone 5. Some of them, like...
I think I've heard enough. Thank you. No. I think I've heard enough. Jim Dale, Paul Burgess, thank you very much. They'll never agree.
Now, just to add a few details to this wildfires in California. This graph shows you above the line is when you get the heat, when you get the hot periods, as it were, and below the line is when you get the wet periods, as it were. And this goes back 2,000 years, and that's it. But if you actually just ask for the drought periods, just the dry periods on a graph, you get this. You can just see from this, if anything, there's a slight decline in the number of droughts, over the last 2,000 years. And just as an aside, AccuWeather actually stated this: California to stay drought-free through 2025 following 2 winters of epic storms. AccuWeather experts say AccuWeather meteorologists have high confidence that widespread drought conditions will remain absent in California through 2025 and potentially beyond. So in actual fact, they were right, actually, as it turned out, because they've had 2 pretty wet years. Well, just to wrap it up, I'll say this. If you want to know more about climate alarmists and droughts, there is a video I've made called just that. It's called Climate Alarmists and Droughts. The link is in the description below this video. And if you want more detail on that, take a look at it. Thank you for watching.